presentation on the Paycheck Protection Program. We will begin the presentation very soon. Thank you again for joining. So as we begin today's presentation, again, I want to welcome everyone. Today's presenters are Debbie Lang, our Chief Credit Officer here at Alerus, and Carrie Metz, our Credit Risk Officer. Again, my name is Mary Eisenberg, and I will be helping to moderate today's presentation. Just a few pieces of information I wanted to share as we begin. Everyone is joining today's session on mute. We want to ensure a high-quality experience for everyone. So we appreciate your understanding on that. I do want to double check. Debbie, let's do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Mary. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, thank you, Debbie. Fantastic. But Debbie is going to go through a presentation here with several slides. We will open up for questions at the end. In order to participate in that Q&A at the end of the presentation, we ask that you click on the Q&A icon. So if you hover over the top of your screen, you're able to see the menu, and the Q&A icon has a question mark with a box around it. If you click on that Q&A, you'll be able to submit a question to me, and I'll moderate those questions at the end of the session. Also, as one final disclosure, we will be recording this session, so we will make that available afterwards. Thank you so much again for joining. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Debbie Lang, who will start our presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary. And Mary, just to confirm, are you going to run the slides for us today?
I sure can, if that works for you.
That does. Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. As Mary said, my name is Debbie Lang, Chief Credit Officer here at Alerus. And I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to join us on today's call. I know that I have been, and I'm sure many of us on this call have been through numerous economic cycles throughout our lives. However, the speed and severity in which our world has literally been turned upside down is truly unprecedented. Please know that as a financial institution in your community, we are working really hard to support you, your business, and employees through this very difficult time. The purpose of our call today is to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. We know that there's been a lot of questions and conversation around this program since it was approved as part of the CARES Act last Friday. We also know that there's a lot of information that has been released on this program, and much of the information that is out there and available is very good and accurate. But I've also seen a number of communications that I think people's rush to get information out, made assumptions without waiting for the program details to be released, creating confusion for many. And one of the things I'm hoping that we can address on today's call is some of those questions that you may have on the program. The objective of our call today is to walk through the program, review pertinent details, as well as talk about the application and approval process here at Alerus. Joining me today is Carrie Metz, our Credit Risk Officer here at Alerus, and really the point person for the PPP program. Carrie is going to be helping me later on when we open it up for some Q&A, as she really understands the finer details of the program. I think it's also important to understand that we are continuing to get updates and clarifications about the program. Program details were released Tuesday afternoon. However, there are what I would say some gray areas in the guidance provided, as well as a number of questions that we still are working on getting clarified. There is ongoing communication from the SBA as far as clarification on some of these things, and we will be participating in some calls later this afternoon that should provide us some additional information and important details. So with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation and really walk through the information that we have for you today. So Mary, if you could take us to that first slide. So at a very high level, the purpose of the program, the Paycheck Protection Program that was part of the CARES Act, is really to provide capital to small businesses to help them meet their short-term ongoing expenses, and most specifically payroll. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through the program, that the underlying objective is to allow companies to have funds available to continue to retain employees on their payroll and to make payroll, but there's also some other expenses that are allowable under the program as well, and we will get into those details. So timing. Timing is a big question. It is coming up very quickly as of tomorrow, Friday, April 3rd. The SBA will start accepting applications for the PPP program if it is a small business or a sole proprietorship. 1 week from now, April 10th, or a week from Friday, independent contractors and self-employed individuals will be eligible to apply. So one of the questions around that we've been hearing a lot from our clients is who is eligible to apply. And I know there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm going to go over it at a fairly high level, and then we can certainly take questions in the Q&A section as well. So at a very high level, very basic level, small businesses with less than 500 full or part-time employees are eligible. Unique to this program and new to the SBA is that nonprofits, independent contractors, self-employed individuals, sole proprietorships, veterans, and tribal businesses are also eligible for this program. Now, there are some exceptions for businesses that have more than 500 employees, and those are industries that work primarily in the hospitality industry, such as restaurants and hotels. And we can help you make that determination. And really, there's a couple of things that we would take a look at, is a NAICS code or an industry code of a 72, or being listed in the SBA franchise directory. So if you have any questions on that, please reach out to us and we can help you understand if you have a business that's more than 500 employees, if you would be eligible. Another requirement of the program is that the business has to have been in operation prior to February 15, 2020, and attribution rules will apply. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of details on attribution rules at this time. There are a lot of nuances to the attribution rules. Alerus does have an informational sheet and checklist up on our website. And one of the things that we're going to do when you apply for this program is we're going to ask for you to indicate if there's any affiliate entities. And the reason we're doing that is we really want to make sure that we are looking at that correctly and ensuring your eligibility, and we're complying with all applicable attribution rules. So how much money can you apply for? What would you be eligible for? So the loan amount that you will be eligible for is up to 2.5 times your average monthly payroll for 2019. And then there's a cap of $10 million. And on the next slide, I'm going to walk you actually through how that calculation would work. One of the important components of this calculation is that any employees that are compensated in excess of $100,000 will be capped at $100,000. So really what that means is if you have an employee on your payroll that is salaried at $125,000, the most you will be eligible for to include in this calculation for determining the loan amount will be $100,000. One of the things that on that checklist, and we're going to ask from you when we are processing the applications for this program, is that we're going to need some payroll documentation in order to substantiate that loan amount calculation. So what types of things can you submit to us as far as payroll documentation? If you have a payroll summary report and corresponding bank statements, that would help us be able to verify and approve that loan amount. IRS forms 940 and 941, we'd be looking to have in that packet. For independent contractors, 1099s, and W-2s work as well, especially if you're a small business with relatively few employees. We're also going to ask that you clarify that all employees live within the United States. So if we go on to the next slide, we can see the actual calculation. And so this is a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is available on our Alerus website to help you make this calculation. And it's pretty straightforward. If you take a look at the first line, it takes a look at the payroll costs, and you can include things like salaries, wages, vacation, and sick pay. It does have that limit of $100,000 that I mentioned, as well as other qualified sick or family leave. And so let's assume that the payroll over for 2019 your entire payroll was $1.2 million, your average monthly would be $100,000. And I actually have to look to make sure that's calculating correctly. The other types of things that would be included would be your group health insurance benefits, retirement benefits, taxes, and some other items. So really what it's going to do is you want to take that 12-month total, divide it by 12, and then it multiplies by 2.5 times to give you the maximum loan amount. Now there is a footnote for seasonal businesses. The applicant may elect to use a seasonal period of February 15th to June 30th, 2019. Mary, can we move on to the next slide? So how do you apply for the program? So there's a few things that we're going to ask you to do in order to apply for the program. Is out on our website is the SBA Paycheck Protection Program application. And I did note you can get it on our website. You can reach out to your advisor here at Alerus, or you can go to sba.gov to find that application. Once you have that application, you need to submit that application. Please make sure it's filled out completely and has been signed to your Alerus advisor, along with the following information. We're going to look for the payroll documentation I just talked about. We're also going to need articles of incorporation and organization, bylaws, operating agreements, and copies of all owners' driver's license. And actually, I should clarify, it would be for any owner over 20%. Now, if you're a current client here at Alerus, we may have much of this information on file already, and if that's the case, you certainly don't need to submit it again. What are the basic terms of the loan? So the Paycheck Protection Program loans are for 2 years, and they will be at an interest rate of 0.5%. And that's one of the things that I think there was a lot of communication on loan terms that was released very quickly that did change when the final guidance was provided. But as of today, the loans are at a 0.5% interest rate and for 2 years. Please understand that the payments are deferred for the first 6 months of the loan. Now, this is one of the items that we are still looking for some clarification on from the SBA. I'm sure many of you are asking right now what happens after that 6-month period, and that's something that we're working to get clarity on. We're not sure if it's going to go to an interest-only payment with the full remaining balance due at maturity, or if P&I payments will be required and amortized over the remaining term of the loan. We will make sure we get that clarification out to everyone as soon as we have that. What can you use this? Oh, sorry, Mary, can we go back? So one of the things people are probably asking is, what can we use the funds for? So you can use your funds for any payroll costs, and that can include benefits. You can also use it for some other expenses, such as interest on your mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities, as long as those obligations were in place prior to February 15th. Another important component of the program is the loans are unsecured, and they do not require a personal guarantee. Now, I am going to qualify that a little bit in the fact that the SBA does have the stipulation that if there's any indication that there was a misappropriation of funds or any fraudulent use of these funds, that there is full recourse back to the ownership of the entity. So there is that stipulation, but otherwise, outside of that, no guarantees are required. Now we're ready for the next slide, Mary. Another important component of the program is there is a forgiveness piece to this program. And so one of the things I want to touch on very briefly is what amount can you expect to be forgiven under the terms of this program. So as of the date that you get the loan, you're going to want to make sure you're keeping track of your expenses for the next 8 weeks. So any amounts that you have in that 8-week period following the issuance of your loan pertaining to payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utility payments are eligible for forgiveness. Now, that being said, again, going back to the underlying objective of this program is for companies to continue to employ their employees and to maintain their payrolls. The government wants the bulk of these funds to be used for payroll costs, and anything non-payroll costs, such as those other items, mortgage, rent, and utility, we expect to be limited to 25%. Other items that will impact the amount of loan forgiveness is any reduction that you have in your staff, as well as a reduction in salaries by more than 25%. like the calculation that we are going to have out there for you to calculate the loan amount, we will also put up a calculation to help assess the amount of forgiveness of the loan. The other thing is, once we reach this 8 weeks period, you are eligible to request from the bank that forgiveness piece. And then once we get the request from you and the required documentation, we're required to get back to you within 60 days with the approval of that forgiveness amount. Mary, do you want to move on to the next slide for me? So what are next steps in the program? So as I mentioned already, we really need to make sure that everybody is going out, getting that SBA application, and get that completed inside. That application is absolutely critical. There are a number of representations and warranties on that application that are required by the SBA that we need to have you verifying and completing for us. Once you've done that part, you will submit your application and the required payroll verification information to your LARIS advisor. And then what happens once you do that? I know that's always a question as far as understanding what the process looks like once you've done your piece of it. Once your advisor has that information, they will go ahead and get that information and application submitted into our underwriting process. And then once it hits the underwriting process, we're going to go through and we're going to verify the eligibility of your company. We're going to verify the loan amount and make sure that we've got the required documentation. Once we've done that verification process, we will enter your request into the SBA E-Trans system, and we will do that under the bank's preferred lender status. So what that means is, as a preferred lender, the SBA does not approve the loan. We actually handle the approval of the loan, but we do need to submit the application from the SBA to secure a loan number. Once we have a loan number from the SBA, your financing has been secured under this program. After we get the loan number from the SBA, then we will continue the process like we would any other loan, and we will work to get the documents put together. We will get those submitted to you. As soon as we have those documents, those signed documents back from you, we will be able to fund on that loan. And then with that, I understand and appreciate that that is a very high-level overview. And really the purpose of today is really to try to understand what questions and things can we help you with to better understand this program. So Mary, can we open it up for questions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Debbie, for providing that high-level overview for everyone. We have several questions that have been submitted through the Q&A, so I'm going to go through them. And just so that everyone is aware, I will get to your question, but we have several attendees on the call and several questions already submitted. So we'll start with Liz has a question. Are employer HSA contributions included in payroll costs?
That's a great question. I'm going to lean on Carrie. Do we have that clarification?
Debbie, we do not have that clarification, but we can definitely follow up after this meeting.
Yeah. So Liz, one of the things that we're going to do, because there's so much information and detail that we're still getting clarification on from the SBA, we are going to keep track of all the questions that we get, and to the extent that we are following up, we will get a Q&A posted on our website, so we make sure that we follow up and get back to all of you with these items and these questions.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. And Liz actually had a follow-up question. Are employer Medicare payments included in payroll costs?
So again, I'm going to have Carrie help me with that from the detail standpoint. And do we know if there's that level of detail yet provided, Carrie?
The SBA is still providing guidance on the specific details of what can and cannot be included. At a high level, we're looking at payroll and some qualifying benefits. We are still waiting for final clarification, which we do expect later today with those webinars and those phone calls that we'll be attending.
Yep. So I do know and understand and appreciate that people are anxious to get their applications in. And what I would recommend that you do is fill out your application, estimate your loan amount to the best of your ability based on what you expect it to be. As we process those applications, we will be going through that supporting documentation and verifying those amounts. And then to the extent that we have, if we're seeing something that's different than what we calculated, then we'll make sure we have your business advisors reaching out, and we will reconcile those amounts as we get this additional clarification.
Ken actually had a question about the application being available now. Debbie, can you speak to that?
So the application for the SBA is available. We are not allowed to start submitting those applications to the SBA until tomorrow. So if you want to get started on the process, you are certainly welcome today to access that application and get it filled out and submit it to your business advisor.
Thank you, Debbie. Catherine had a question. What is an LLC considered in terms of the date the application be sent in?
I would expect that that would fall under the small business provision and that we will be able to start processing those applications as of tomorrow on the 3rd. Carrie, would you see that differently?
Debbie, I'm in concurrence with that response, yes.
Okay, so yep, as of tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Casey had a question, and I think this is in reference to one of the earlier slides you had in your deck, referring to the list and all of the required items on that list. For example, the IRS forms, the W-2s, certification that all employees live in the U.S. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So we do have a checklist out on our website, which provides some of this detail as well as that information. And we don't necessarily need every one of those documents with every application. What we really need to make sure that we're doing is that we have some kind of verification as to what's your actual payroll amounts. So that may take on different forms. It may be that payroll summary report. To the extent that you have those IRS forms, that's really helpful in our ability to verify those amounts, as well as those W-2s, but you don't necessarily need to send us all of those items. We just need sufficient documentation in order to verify your payroll. If we get your application and we need additional information, we will make sure that we follow up with you and get that detail so we can continue to get your application moving ahead.
Thank you, Debbie. Mike had a question as well. Mike's question, they referenced prorating payroll in excess of $100,000 for the period of February 15th to June 30th. Does this mean we only exclude the 4.5 months of those wages over $100,000?
So I think that question is pertaining to the seasonal calculation. And I have not seen anything that would tell me that. And maybe, Mary, repeat the question one more time. I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Sure. Mike's question says they referenced prorating payroll in excess of $100,000 for the period February 15th to June 30th. Does this mean we only exclude the 4.5 months of those wages over $100,000?
So Debbie, I can step in if you'd like.
That'd be great.
So if the question is referring to seasonal companies, yes, you would prorate their compensation package to be over, prorate their compensation for seasonal workers. So essentially on an annual basis, you would not exceed $100,000.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carrie.
Another question came in from Janine. When it asks for the number of employees, are there any guidelines on what to put in there? Is it total number of people employed all of last year, or the total number of employees on the payroll from January to June 2019, or the average number of employees every month?
Carrie, I believe it's the average number of employees, but do we have additional clarification?
It is the average number of employees, correct?
Yeah, so take a look at what your payroll staff, including both full and part-time employees, were over 2019 and take the average of that. And that is going to be an important calculation because one of the things that we're going to need to take a look at when it comes time for that forgiveness piece is we're going to look at those average number of payrolls in 2019 relative to the average number of payroll employees today, and that will play into the component of forgiveness that you'll be eligible for.
Debbie, you may have mentioned this, but just wanted to get clarification for people. Again, where to find the application and also a copy of the slide deck.
Sure. So, we can put a copy of the slide deck up on our Alaris.com website. I do believe, and I think we have Missy on the call as well, but we do have the application out on our Alaris.com website. You can also reach out to your business advisor if you'd like. They also all have access to this application, and they can forward it on to you as well. And then your other option for getting the application would be at sba.gov.
And Debbie, if I can supplement, all the content of this slide deck should be on the checklist as a supplement for clients who desire to review that information as well.
Okay, great, Carrie. So it sounds like we already have a lot of this information out there for you to take a look at. But again, if you have questions, please make sure you're reaching out to our advisors. We've been spending a lot of time making sure that they are getting educated and up to speed on this program to the extent we have the information.
Excellent. Another question came in, do you have to submit proof for employer health insurance premium cost? And if so, why?
I'm sorry, Mary, I missed the first part of that question. Can you say that again?
Sure. Do you have to submit proof for employer health insurance premium cost? And if so, why?
So Carrie, can you help with that?
Sure. So what we've seen in the guidance thus far is that internal documentation, which the company is using, whether it be a GL or some other type of reporting on their internal system, will suffice. That is the guidance as of today. They would not need to submit proof of their actual insurance providers.
And really what we're required to do from an SBA standpoint and as a preferred lender to qualify these loans is we need to verify that loan amount. So we need that documentation to be able to back into that loan number.
Perfect. Thank you, Debbie. Another question from Casey. Are you working with non-Alerus clients for the loan?
We are. Now, we are expecting a substantial volume of applications, and so we're going to do our very best to get through all of those applications as soon as we can. And so if you're currently a non-Alerus client and are looking to have access to this program, please reach out to us. We will put you in contact with an advisor, and they can help you through that process.
Thank you, Debbie. Camille had a question. Is healthcare expenses just medical, or does it also include dental, vision, etc.?
I believe it includes all. Carrie, is that correct?
Our interpretation that is all encumbering, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Mike had a question. They've referenced state payroll taxes. Would this include North Dakota WSI insurance?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Carrie, do you know?
We can follow up after this meeting.
Okay, we will check on that for you and try to get that information out there.
Okay, thank you. Patrick has a question. Can we prepay utilities, like for example, annual contracts and services that would qualify in the forgiveness?
Debbie, I can actually pick this one because this question is currently out to our SBA consultant. We are following up and we will have feedback, Debbie, unless you have a direct response at this time.
No, and so we want to make sure that we do kind of verifying so we're accurate on the information. You know, as I was listening to that question, my first thought is I would think you could prepay, but you're only going to be eligible for the amount that would be prorated for the applicable forgiveness period. But we will get clarification on that.
Perfect, thank you. Janine had a question. What is the deadline to file for forgiveness before the 6-month deferral end date?
There really isn't, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen a specific deadline as far as when you need to file for that forgiveness amount. Now keep in mind the principal and interest payments on the loan are going to be deferred for the first 6 months. So my recommendation would be is you want to get those requests for forgiveness and the required documentation in during that first 6-month period.
The additional guidance has been supplied that they are recommending that you apply for that forgiveness prior to this calendar year end.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Next question is from Susan. Susan asked, I already applied online for SBA, but do we need to process the form you mentioned due April 3rd as well?
So I think we need a little bit more clarification on that question because when I hear that there was already an application online, I'd like to better understand if that was specifically a PPP loan because the PPP loans are applied and processed through banks. Now, there is also some SBA funding available through the Disaster Relief Program, and that is a direct loan with the SBA. Now, if we're referring to the Disaster Relief Program, as long as that application was processed or submitted for that program prior to March 31st, you will still be eligible to apply for the PPP loan. However, after March 31st, you can either apply for the PPP loan or the disaster program, but you cannot apply for both.
Thank you for clarifying, Debbie. Question from Jake, how is the date of issuance defined? Do the 8 weeks start from the approval date from the SBA or when the LYRIC delivers the funds to our account? And how much gap in time may there be between approval and funds in the account?
Sure. So I believe it's from funding, isn't it, Carrie?
It is from the date of origination of the loan.
Right. So once we fund the loan, that's when the 8-week period would start. As far as timing, some of that's going to depend on, we're gonna do everything we can to move these through our process as quickly as possible. Again, understand we're expecting to see a huge volume of requests. We are allocating additional resources from our other areas of our organization to help us process all of these applications in a timely manner. Once we get the docs out to you, as soon as you get those back, we can go ahead and fund on that loan.
Thank you, Debbie. Question from Tim, will we be able to email copies of signed applications, assuming that we do not want to physically hand off those applications at the bank location?
You can submit the requests electronically.
And just to supplement, once those are submitted electronically, the bank will, however, need to obtain inked signatures on the application and documentation. So please just retain those for your reference. The bank will be asking for those within a 6-month period after origination.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great clarification, Carrie. Right now, the SBA is requiring that we do have what we would refer to as a wet signature on the application and the loan documents, which means we need to have that original signed application and documents as part of that package. Now, we are hearing that the SBA is getting a lot of pushback on that requirement, but as of today, the requirement is that we have to have those signed documents within 6 months of funding the loan. So to Carrie's point, and that's a great clarification, you can submit it to us electronically, but we will need you to hold on to that original signed document, and we will be following up with you to make sure we have that in our file.
Thank you, Debbie and Carrie. Tracy had a question. How do you treat the tips that your employees earned in 2019?
So tips are eligible, I know. And Carrie, is there additional detail as far as how they calculate that?
There is no additional guidance at this point, but yes, tips are eligible to be included.
Right. So again, that would be something that to the extent that tips are included as part of your calculation for the loan amount, please make sure that you're providing us documentation in detail as far as how that amount was calculated.
Thank you. Next question is from Jessica. What payroll summary and bank statements are needed and what months?
Well, I can jump in there, Debbie. What we're looking for is the entire year of 2019. From an internal standpoint, if you submit your forms 940 and 941 from 12/31 of 2019, and the bank is able to cross-reference that same content information with your internal reporting, that's sufficient validation for the bank from an SBA standpoint. So provided that we can reconcile your form 940 and 941 to your internal statements, that's sufficient to move forward with.
Yeah, and Carrie, just as a clarification, when we're referring to internal statements, is that like internal financial statements or their internal payroll statements?
That is their internal payroll statement that they would submit.
Thank you.
Next question from Felicia. On the application, it says number of jobs. What does this include? Does it include at the end of 2019 or right now at this moment?
Right, so I think we had touched on that earlier, but just to clarify, the number of employees would be based on the average number for 2019. So again, that's something that we're going to ask for you to include as part of your payroll documentation so we can understand how you arrived at that calculation.
Thank you, Debbie. This next question is from Robert, and I believe you did touch on this, but just to ensure that he has the answer he needs, do we need to supply all of the items for payroll verification or just one of them?
So, Carrie, do you want to maybe clarify that? We don't need all. If we have like a payroll summary report as well as the tax forms for verification, we wouldn't need W-2s.
That is correct, Debbie.
Yeah. So really it just depends. We listed all those things because we want to make sure we're covering a wide range of businesses that may have different types of information. So a very small business with limited number of employees, it may be easier for those entities to really just submit the W-2s. For larger companies that have a more formalized payroll process, internal pay reports and tax returns would be required.
Thank you, Debbie and Carrie. A question from Dennis. His staff is under a PEO, so his question is, how should I submit the appropriate documents?
So I'm not sure, Carrie, do you know?
We'll have to follow up with that after this session.
Okay, so thank you for the question, and we will have that as a takeaway. And again, we'll get some Q&As out on our website, and we'll make sure we get that addressed.
Again, I believe these next two questions are related back to the insurance, and Debbie, you may have already covered this, but again, I just want to ensure people have the exact answers that they need. So Peter's question refers to, does group health insurance include both health premiums and health claims?
Oh, I'm not sure on the claims piece. It would definitely include the premiums, and that's something that we would need to clarify. And Carrie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
We need further guidance from the SBI on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything that would tell me that the claims are eligible, but we will confirm that.
Okay, and Peter's second part to his question was specifically asking for, does it include dental, vision, life, long-term disability, long-term care, critical illness, so all of those, which I think you touched on, Debbie.
We did, and yes, those would be included in the calculation.
Okay, all right. Carrie, I believe you had a question about the health insurance costs, which we just were able to answer. If you have a follow-up question, feel free to submit that to the chat. And then Emily had a question. When calculating your average monthly payroll, do you have to use 2019 or can you use the previous 12 months? For example, Q2 of 2019 through Q1 of 2020.
So there has been several guidance put out on that, and there are some different areas that are providing different feedback from an institution, and from what we are being provided from our SBA guidance, we will be using fiscal year 2019.
Thank you, Carrie. Ishmael had a question. You mentioned that the program is to cover the next 8 weeks. When is the starting time? Just want to clarify that.
Yep, so the starting time is when we fund on your loan. So that will be important, and I know I mentioned it previously, but just to emphasize, when you get ready to submit a request for that forgiveness piece, making sure that you're maintaining good documentation in that 8-week period will be really critical, because to the extent that we get the appropriate documentation, that will help us process those requests for forgiveness that much faster.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. And on this leads into the next question from Terry. If we get a loan for 8 weeks, and if after 4 weeks we get business back to normal, what is our responsibility to repay the loan?
Let me give that some thought. I haven't had that question before. You know, right now the guidance is that anything is eligible for forgiveness for 8 weeks. So, you know, it doesn't speak to as far as what is going on with your business. So you would be eligible to ask for forgiveness for any of those approved expenses in that 8-week period. And then if there's some amount that is not forgiven as part of that calculation, any amounts due and owing would be required within a 2-year period.
And Debbie, just to supplement on that comment, the client or applicant can prepay the loan. So if they are back to normal and their cash flow supports, and they have not used the funds, there's no prepayment penalty, so they can prepay any portion after those 4 weeks if necessary.
Right. One of the other questions that we've gotten, which I'll just share as well, is we had a call with our advisors yesterday, and one of the questions we got is, what if a company is looking for some level of financing, but maybe not as much as what they're technically eligible for? And the recommendation that we've been given is that you apply for the amount that you're eligible for, so just follow the calculation, follow the formula, and then to the extent that you are not looking for that full amount, just go ahead and pay down that loan right away. Again, Carrie said there's no prepayment penalties, so just pay down that loan.
Thank you, Debbie and Carrie. On a related question that may be phrased a little bit differently, Jake had a question. Will the forgiveness be prorated based on the payroll cost shortfall, the quantity of employees, or a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. So the prorated amount is going to be, the forgiveness amount will be prorated based on both the number of employees as well as the amount of payroll. One of the things that the government wants to ensure is that payrolls are maintained and as many people employed as possible. So they're going to look at that actual number of employees, but then they also want to ensure that there's not substantial pay cuts to employees. So anything over 25% as far as a pay reduction will factor into that forgiveness calculation.
Thank you, Debbie. Kara had a question. The rules state that we can't reduce staff. What number is that compared to? The annual average, or what other number?
I believe it's the average number of employees that you had in 2019. And Carrie, can you maybe clarify that further for me?
Absolutely. We have received guidance that it is the average number of employees in 2019 as compared to the 8 weeks of forgiveness period, or what they're calling the qualifying period for 2020.
Thank you. Scott had a question. What about a 1099 employee?
Those, excuse me, go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, no, those are eligible. We just need that 1099 form.
Thank you. Felicia had a question. Could you please, Debbie, go over again how we get reimbursed for the forgiveness?
Sure, absolutely. And so anytime after that 8-week period, after your loan has funded, you can apply to the bank or make a request to the bank for the forgiveness amount. So what we're going to ask when you make that request to your business advisor is the documentation supporting the amount that you feel you're eligible for forgiveness. And we will make sure we get out on our website once we get through this initial piece of just funding on all of these loans, a calculation that you can use as a guide to help determine that forgiveness amount. Once we've received the request, your business advisor will work with you on making sure that we have all the information we need in order to substantiate that amount of forgiveness. We will run through those calculations, and we are required to make that determination and get back to you with the confirmed amount of forgiveness within 60 days.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. Brian had a question. Are utilities defined, phone and cell included in that bucket?
I have not seen anything that defines utility. Carrie, I don't know. Have you seen anything more on that?
There's not clear definition. It's just provided that utilities.
Okay. Next question is from Don. He asked, if there are 2 owners, does each owner complete a form, or do both owners sign the same form?
I believe the form is set up for both owners to sign the same form. You just need to submit one application, but we do need a signature from any owner that has more than 20% ownership interest in the company.
Thank you, Debbie. Robert had a question. Is employer 401k profit sharing included in payroll costs?
Carrie, do you know? I'm trying to recall.
I do not know that exact breakdown or detail. We can follow up after this webinar.
Yeah, let us confirm, because most benefits are included, but I'm not sure that I've seen anything that tells me that 401k is an eligible benefit, but we will confirm that.
Okay. Thank you. Chris had a question. Can you clarify the NAICS code restriction?
So the NAICS code restriction is only applicable to entities that have more than 500 employees. And really what the SBA is saying is that they really want this program targeted at small businesses. So those businesses that have less than 500 employees. However, they recognize that certain industries have been hit especially hard with this specific downturn and the COVID-19 virus, and those are industries within the hospitality and the restaurant industry. And so we can help you with that if you need to understand. NAICS code is really an industry type code. And so from an SBA eligibility standpoint, what they're saying is that if it's a business that would have a code of a 72, then that company is potentially eligible for funding under this program, even though they have more than 500 employees, as long as an individual location does not have more than 500 employees. So really for hospitality would be a good example of that an individual location in the hospitality industry might be part of an organization that has more than 500 employees, but because of the industry type, they would be eligible for participation in this program.
Thank you, Debbie. I do want to note that we are at the end of our time, but there are several questions left in the queue, so I am going to continue. Okay, Debbie and Carrie?
Yep, that's great.
Perfect. Joe had a question. What types of documents are needed to certify employees live within the U.S.?
I believe on the SBA application, it's just a certification that you need to verify. The other thing that we will take a look at when we're looking at your payroll records is information as far as those employees. And Carrie, has there been additional detail on that?
There's no additional detail needed at this time. The owners over 20% just need to certify that they all do live within the United States.
Right, yep. So again, that SBA application form is really critical because it's going to ask all of you a number of questions that we are going to ask you to verify to confirm eligibility, and that would be one of them.
Thank you. Next is Rachel's question. We started to issue furloughs to about 10 part-time staff back on March 20th. If we get access to this loan, are we required to pay back those part-time employees that lost hours of work?
Mary, can you repeat the first part of the question? I apologize.
Sure, that's okay. This person had to issue furloughs to about 10 part-time staff back on March 20th. If they get access to this loan, are they required to pay back those part-time employees that lost hours of work?
They are not required to pay back. However, they do have the option to bring those employees back on staff. There is a grace period as we look to enter into this application if that's the business decision that they desire.
And their ability to bring those employees back on staff will then help factor into that forgivable calculation because that is something that would be looked at.
Thank you. Debbie, I believe you covered this, but I do want to ask, Gloria had a question about independent contractors. What do they need to do and how does it apply to them?
So independent contractors are eligible under the program, and I believe we would need a 1099 on that. Is that correct, Carrie?
That is correct.
Yep. So really an independent contractor is eligible to apply. They would go through the same process as everybody else and fill out that SBA application, complete those certifications, and then provide the required documentation, and most likely that will be that 1099 form.
Thank you. Next question from this client says, I completed a disaster loan assistance application already and have an application number and a confirmation of submission. Is this the acceptable application?
So the disaster recovery loan is a separate loan and a separate program from the PPP program. So as long as that disaster recovery submission was made prior to March 31st, you can be eligible for funds under the PPP program, although I do believe the proceeds of those funds have to be used for different purposes. Isn't that correct, Carrie?
That is correct. The proceeds from the loan, the uses of the loan need to be used for different purposes as to not essentially double dip or receive compensation twice for the same expense.
Right, yep, but for those businesses that have already applied to the disaster program, as long as they use those proceeds differently, so for things other than payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities, you are eligible to apply for the PPP loan as long as that application for disaster relief was prior to March 31st. After that date, you need to pick one program or the other.
Thank you for clarifying. A question from Sam. If an owner receives funds as a guaranteed payment, do these funds count toward payroll costs?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Mary. Maybe can you repeat it again?
Sure. If an owner receives funds as a guaranteed payment, do these funds count towards payroll costs?
They receive funds as part of a guaranteed payment. I'm still not sure I'm fully understanding the question. We might need some clarification. Carrie, do you have a sense of maybe what he's looking to understand?
I do have a sense of what he's looking to gain better understanding on, and the guidance we've received is that any income flowing through your K-1 schedule is essentially cannot be included. It would need to be actually a salary or wages, something you pay taxes on, payroll taxes on to be qualifying, but we can provide further guidance after this.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carrie, for that clarification. We did get a question yesterday as far as some owners I know choose to be compensated via distributions as opposed to salary. And to Carrie's point, those distributions are not eligible for determination of the loan amount. Only salary expenses are eligible.
Okay, thank you. Another question, just to reiterate about consultants, any restrictions on those 1099s or outside sales reps?
Not that I'm aware of. Carrie, are you aware of anything?
There are no restrictions at this point.
Okay, thank you. And I think you covered this, but again, just want to make sure Kate has the answer she needs. Should average tips be included in payroll costs?
So up to this point, we are aware that tips are eligible for inclusion. We don't have specific detail as far as that calculation, but I would take the same approach to payroll to tips as I would take to payroll. And I think her approach to taking average tips would be reasonable and appropriate.
Okay. Thank you. Next question came in, sorry, one second, Debbie. From Donna, are ER federal taxes such as Social Security, Medicare included in payroll costs?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Adam had a question, are owners of S-Corp who are also W-2 employees included in payroll calculation, or would I be considered self-employed?
You would not be,
Go ahead, Carrie.
We appreciate the question. You would not be considered self-employed if your owner compensation and salary, provided that you are being issued that salary as a non-distribution, would be included.
Thank you. This question Bruce asked, and I'm not sure if you've covered this, but I wanted to get a little more clarification around it. What other stimulus can and cannot be applied for together? So for example, if we apply for the PPP, does that prevent us from applying to another stimulus package?
Yeah, so there are some restrictions within the SBA that we've touched on already, but as far as applying for other stimulus programs, I know various states have different programs available to them. You're not restricted from applying to those other programs. And Carrie, maybe you want to clarify a little bit as far as from an SBA standpoint, what other loans and programs they could be eligible for if they apply in the PPP program.
So they are eligible for any other state or federal money through grants and other programs. They are eligible to apply. Again, Debbie, you touched on earlier that provided that they applied for that disaster relief, which is a direct SBA loan that applicants would have applied through the SBA website prior to 3/31, they are eligible to apply again for the PPP program. But as guidance goes, that's the only stipulation at this point that the SBA has issued in regards to applying for multiple grants or stimulus packages.
Right. So right now, Carrie, as far as we know, the only restriction is that you can't double dip into the disaster recovery program as well as the PPP program, but that wouldn't necessarily preclude them from applying for other types of SBA financing.
Absolutely not. They can still apply for other SBA programs. There's no guidance that says otherwise.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right. Question from Brad, and I know Carrie and Debbie, you did answer this, but I want to get clarification for Brad on his question. When does the 8 weeks start? Maybe some businesses might want to wait a month or so. Any advice you have to offer on that?
Sure. So the 8 weeks will start once the loan is funded. So when we get those signed loan documents back, we will go ahead and fund on that loan, and that's when your 8-week time period would start. As far as timing and applying into the program, a couple comments on that. The program was funded at $350 billion. Now, what we are expecting and what we are hearing is that there is a very high demand for funding through this program, and that at some point in time, the funding will run out. Now, we're not sure how fast that's going to happen, but we have been hearing that. The other thing I've been hearing, even as most recently as this morning, is there's already talk about reloading this program. So really, the question as far as timing and the recommendation is a determination that you will need to make. But at this point, I would say if you feel like you do have that need in order to make payroll and want to apply into the program, I would probably do it sooner rather than later. Because again, at this point in time, there is a specific amount of funding available. And while we expect that there may be additional funding coming down the road, we can't say with certainty at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. So again, as I'm going through the queue here, the Q&A, some of these questions I am finding there that you may have already answered. So the dates for the 8-week period starting is the date of the loan when it's funded, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're that. And then another question related to that is, what about for seasonal workers? Is the term period 12 weeks instead of 8?
So I'm not sure when they're saying term period of 12 weeks if that's determining for the forgiveness piece or on the calculation of the loan amount. And Carrie, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
So in regards to, just to supplement, just to provide feedback on both avenues, in regards to the forgiveness piece, it is still 8 weeks as it would be for a non-seasonal business. In regards to the determination of that payroll for 2019, it would be the 12 weeks.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying, Carrie. Let's see. Peter had a question, and I think you may have touched on this, Debbie, but in the specific case, do retirement benefit costs include safe harbor contributions and profit sharing contributions?
Yeah, I'm not sure on those calculations, and that's something we do need to get some follow-up on. Again, there's more information coming out yet this afternoon on this program because there are, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, some gray areas in the guidance that's been released at this point and some questions that we need to have answered. I have not seen anything that would say those 401k contributions and those types of contributions are eligible, but we will get additional clarification on that and get that information out on our website as soon as we have it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Let's go back to the seasonal employees. Randy had a question and needs some clarification. How are seasonal or intern who employment agreement has been completed count against your employee head count? Are you penalized when an intern or a seasonal person leaves?
So Carrie, do you want to help with that?
So, perfect. Debbie, I know you had touched on it earlier. We're looking to use the average amount of, or average number of employees on a monthly basis for 2019. If by chance one or two would leave, it would have a minimal impact to that forgiveness, but there will be an impactful change. If there's an impactful change to the number of employees, yes, then the forgiveness amount would be reduced. But again, you're looking at taking that average number for 2019 for the qualifying period, and then, like I said, the average for that 8 weeks.
Thank you, Carrie. And just to clarify, I think you touched on this, Debbie, in your presentation. Where do we send these applications and documentation? Do they go to the advisor or directly to Carrie?
These should be going directly to your advisor. So, yep, so please reach out to your advisor. If you do not currently have an advisor that you're working with at Alerus, please reach out to our customer service and we will put you in contact with someone.
Perfect, thank you.
Additionally, if Debbie, I can follow up to that, that feedback. Out on the Alerus.com website, there's also a form that non-current clients can fill out to supplement and be provided directly to an advisor. That's a better course or easier course for our applicants.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. Amy has a question here. We use a temporary employment agency in addition to our regular employees. Are payments made to the temp agency eligible?
I haven't seen anything that tells me that they would be, but I haven't seen anything that tells me they wouldn't be. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Carrie?
So actually, I had requested some additional guidance as we had received the same question from another applicant. And if you're making a payment to a temp company, If you're not paying any type of payroll taxes, they would not be included.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Dave had a couple of questions too, so let me get these out here for you. How do we know which bank the PPP loan is being processed through?
So the bank is whatever bank you apply to.
Okay. And then his second question is, does this apply to a single member LLC?
It does.
Okay. I think we got Dave's questions. Dean had a question, he wanted clarification. All literature was saying the remaining loan after forgiveness was over 10 years, but Debbie, you explained that it would be over a 2-year period. Which is correct, and if it's 2 years, why the change?
So it's 2 years. I don't know why the change. The original information that came out prior to the specific guidance did talk to that 10-year period. But the guidance that was released this past Tuesday, which is what we're operating under, has a 2-year period. And I really can't answer why it changed. I don't know. I haven't heard anything along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Question here from Rick. What if we can't reopen our business after 8 weeks and I need to lay off employees at that time? Would I still be eligible for forgiveness?
So to the extent that you've continued to pay employees during that 8-week period, I would say yes, you would be eligible for forgiveness.
Okay. And just to clarify, and I think this has been mentioned, but the worksheet calculator, is that going to be available on the Alerus website?
It should already be out there, but we'll make sure it is.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions around the 1099s, Debbie and Carrie, so thank you. As I'm looking through these. Jessica, I wanted to clarify, do we just add 1099s to the employee payroll cost to calculate the average monthly payroll?
I would say yes. Carrie, are your thoughts different?
That would be my recommendation as well.
Yep.
Okay. All right. We are working through the queue. So Letitia had a question. All documentation that will be submitted is 2019, correct?
Correct. Yep. And that's as Carrie mentioned before, there's been some different perspectives on us, but the guidance that we've been given and the guidance that we're following is we're going to use 2019 payroll to determine that average amount for loan purposes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Trevor had a question here. What do we need to provide for affiliate companies if you were filling out an application for each affiliate?
So let us know on that checklist that we have. When you submit your application, just let us understand kind of who those affiliates are and understanding ownership percentages and that ownership structure between those affiliates. Make sure we know that information, and then we will take a look at how that factors into eligibility and work with you on that.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Steve came in. If some of the salary total for the 12-month period is from year-end salary bonuses to employees, do the employees' salaries need to be adjusted or increased, for example, for that period of this loan?
So Carrie, you can help me out or correct me. My understanding is it's eligible as long as it's under that $100,000 cap, but Carrie, have you seen anything different on that?
I have not seen anything different. Bonuses, commissions, et cetera, are eligible. Again, you would need to abide by that $100,000 cap.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Casey had a question, and this is going back from earlier as I'm trying to get caught up in the queue here of questions, but talking about those items required on the list, I think you touched on that documentation, Debbie.
Yes, so we've got the checklist out there. And again, we tried to list the types of things that would be most common. It may not be applicable to every business, and you really just need to take a look at your individual company and provide to us what would be the appropriate documentation for us to be able to verify that payroll amount so we can ensure that appropriate loan calculation.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to segue to Missy here in just a few minutes, and she can help navigate to where all of that information will be available. Let's see. Okay, going through just a few more questions. How do we compute FTEs if we have part-time and full-time employees? Also, how do we compute average number of employees? Do we look on a certain day of each month? Any guidance there?
So it would be for average of 2019. And Carrie, I don't know what your thoughts are as far as if it's a month end or how that calculation goes.
So you're looking for the average throughout on a month-to-month basis. So you would take your month and you would take the average based on your 30 days, and within the month is the guidance that we've been provided at this point.
This is a question I want to make sure I didn't miss, but what documentation will be required for forgiveness? Did we cover that?
So we will need documentation, and so really what we need is payroll proof. So similar to what we're going to ask for you for verification of the loan amount. So those payroll statements, anything that we can use to substantiate that payroll amount. And then to the extent that you are looking for forgiveness for non-payroll type items such as mortgage interest, rent or utilities, we would need to have either bank statements, verification of payment, utility statements, any of those types of things would work.
Okay, thank you. Chris had a question. With regard to ownership, is there a distinction between voting and non-voting shares?
I'm not aware of that distinction at that level. It's really just based on that ownership percentage, regardless of if it's voting or non-voting.
Okay, thank you. And Geraldine had a question for nonprofits with no owners. Would the executive director sign the documents?
So it would be who would ever be part of your authorized signer per your documentation.
Okay. And a follow-up question, for salaries and wages reimbursed by a client, are these salaries and wages eligible for forgiveness?
Well, my first thought is no, but Carrie, can you clarify?
I don't have any direct clarification that we've received from the SBA, but again, I would concur with Debbie that it would likely not be.
Okay. Thank you both. I think we did get Steve's question here. Question from Peggy. If we are an Alerus client, do we need to attach the corresponding bank statements with our payroll summary?
You don't. If it's documentation that we would have on file already because you are a current client, you do not need to submit that information to us again.
Okay, thank you. Question for Jessica to clarify. The loan amount is 2.5 times the payroll amount, so how does that cover rent and utilities?
So that's a great question and important distinction. So for determining the loan amount, it is strictly based on your payroll costs. Now you can use those proceeds in part for rent and utilities to determine the forgiveness amount, but that is not something we would look at in the calculation for the amount of the loan.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. A question from Vern. If our employees that make over 100,000 removed from the equation or capped at the 100,000 in the calculation?
So you do not need to remove them in entirety. You just need to cap them at that 100,000. So you can include it in the calculation up to 100,000, but any compensation over that amount would need to be excluded.
Okay. Debbie, I know you've covered this and what people would be eligible for or how these programs work together or not, but just want to clarify for Jeffrey. They received their SBA disaster loan on March 31st with an application number. Can they still do the SBA disaster loan and the PPP?
Yep, as long as it was on March 31st or prior to that, they are still eligible for an application submission under the PPP program, although as we noted before, they need to make sure that the use of proceeds are different. And so the disaster relief proceed loans would need to go for something other than payroll costs or those other items we've talked about, such as mortgage interest, rent, and utilities.
Thank you. Question from Kim. Do you have an estimate on the timeline at all if an application is submitted tomorrow?
We don't, and we're getting that question a lot, and it's a great question. What I can tell you is that there are components of this process that we can control, and there are components of this process that we cannot control. So we have a process in place. We have allocated additional resources to this process to make sure that we are taking these loans through the process as quickly as possible. What we can't control is the SBA website. We are expecting an unprecedented number of applications to be submitted to the SBA, especially in these first few days of the program opening up. In the time frame in which the SBA is able to accept those applications and get back to us with that loan number, we don't have a sense as far as what that's going to look like at this point in time. But I can assure you that we're going to try to get these processed as quickly as possible on our end, and we will continue to let you know how we're doing in that process. And if you have questions, please reach out to your business advisor.
Okay, thank you. A question from Ronald. We use the 2019 wage information to calculate the average monthly cost to determine the maximum loan amount, and then we go through the 8-week determination of the money spent on allowed expenses. What if we don't spend all of the loan proceeds?
So to the extent you don't use all of the loan proceeds for those approved expenses, so for that 8-week period of payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities, you would be required to pay back that loan amount, and that loan amount is due within that 2-year period.
Thank you, Debbie. Jay had a question. Do owner draws within an LLC count as payroll?
They do not. So if you're taking a draw that's outside of your normal payroll processing, that is not eligible. Only expenses as part of the actual payroll would be eligible.
Okay, thank you. David had a question. Monthly car allowance, are those expenses included in the payroll?
I haven't seen anything that would say they would be included. So my recommendation is that it's limited to those items that are listed on the application that would be eligible, and I don't believe that's one of them. Carrie, I don't know if your thoughts would be different on that.
My thoughts would be in line with that exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Question from Brad, and I know we've talked about the 100K limit and some previous questions, but just want to make sure we're all on the same page. When calculating the 100,000 limit per employee, does that include state taxes, retirement contributions, and insurance premiums, or is it just the wages alone?
I believe it's total compensation. Carrie, would you?
So the guidance we are receiving it is total compensation. However, we are receiving additional guidance from the SBA potentially this afternoon that outlines that.
Okay. Thank you. Question here from Randy. His business has been closed since March 17th based on the governor's executive order, planning to reopen in May when the order is lifted. What happens if the order is extended in regards to this 8-week period to use the funds?
At this point in time, the guidance is limited to this 8-week period. If that would change, then we would let everybody know. But at this point in time, it's strictly the 8-week period. It has not been extended based on different circumstances.
Right. I think you may have answered this question, but Debbie, let's just clarify one more time. Any employee whose salary is over $100,000, do we cap it, or are they removed from the equation?
Just the cap. So they can include them up to that $100,000. And as we just addressed in one of the prior questions, right now our understanding is that's based on total payroll costs, but we'll make sure we get that clarification.
Thank you. Question from Victoria. I believe I'm reading this correctly. Does the executive director of a nonprofit need to be listed in the applicant ownership?
So I think, again, that would be based on who your authorized individual is to be able to basically obtain financing and loans for your entity. So that would be based on your articles of incorporation.
Debbie, just to provide further clarification, if I'm understanding the question correctly, they would not be listed as an owner. However, they could sign the application on behalf of.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that clarification, Carrie.
Excellent. Okay, Christy had a question. Could you please clarify the difference between the owner's salary versus distribution?
Sure. So the owner's salary would be something that would be a W-2 wages that would go through their normal payroll, and a distribution would be something that's done outside of that.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Carrie. I'm looking at the application I received from my Alerus banker. It asks for last 12 months, but did we determine that instead of last 12 months, are we using the 2019 payroll?
That is correct. We are using the 2019 payroll.
And that's a determination we made after consulting with the SBA and consulting that the recommendation is to use the 2019 payroll.
Okay. Thank you. A couple questions that I'm fielding too about where all of this information will be referenced. We will turn it over to our Director of Communication here as soon as I get through the queue to help navigate to that site. So if you're still able to hang on the call, we'll be able to navigate there in just a few minutes, but a few questions left in the queue. Question from Victoria, we are a nonprofit. How do we sign the application? Is it just as an authorized representative, or do we need 2 signatures, or potentially would this require a board resolution?
Mary, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. So what I would recommend and what the guidance has stated thus far is that we would look to what your borrowing resolution is today and who can, within the organization, execute a contract or engage in financing options for that organization. So I would refer back to your articles and directly from your board, and whoever has that authority, I would have them be signing the application.
Thank you, Carrie. Question from Thomas. He had applied for the SBA 10,000K emergency grant for April 1st, but would rather get this PPP loan. How does he go about rejecting or canceling that emergency application?
Yeah, and Carrie, I know we got a couple questions on this as well yesterday. Do you want to clarify that for him?
Absolutely. There is no restriction within the SBA for applying for outside SBA financing or grants outside of the PPP program, provided that the only stipulation is the difference in the disaster relief and the PPP program. The applicant would still be eligible to apply for the PPP program and the grant that they've requested.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying, Carrie. Question from Susan, how do we get connected with an Alerus advisor? Any suggestions there?
The best recommendation that I could provide is to go out to alerus.com. There is a few fields to supplement the applicant's information, and then they will be paired up with an advisor from their direct market.
Yeah, so there is an inquiry form out on our website that you can use to submit and let us know that you're interested in getting in touch with someone for this program.
Thank you. Question from Rich. We have not terminated any employees in 2020, but our employee roster is smaller than 2019. How will they handle a situation like that if our average number will be down, but not because of layoffs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And right now, my understanding would be that would factor into the amount of forgiveness. And Carrie, I don't know if you have any insight different from that.
I don't have any additional information. Unfortunately, for consistency purposes of the program, it will factor in. However, that's a natural cycle within some businesses.
Okay. Thank you both for clarifying. Question from Rick, if my payroll expenses are less than 75% of my total expenses, how much of my forgiveness will be disallowed?
So you're eligible for full reimbursement and forgiveness on all your payroll expenses, but above and beyond that, right now our understanding is it's going to be capped at 25% for some of those other types of expenses.
Thank you, Debbie. Jason had a question and just would like a little further clarification. It was mentioned the 31st date, and he asked for any further detail about this date.
I'm assuming when he's asking about the 31st date, that's in reference to the disaster recovery program. And so as we've talked about, if your business has applied for that disaster recovery program, as long as that was done prior to the 31st, you can still apply for the PPP program. But after the 31st, so if you would have filed it on April 1st, you would not be eligible for the PPP program.
Thanks, Debbie, for clarifying that. Okay, and one more clarification. Again, you may have answered this, but we just want to double check and make sure. Peter had a question. Could you confirm if owner pay is eligible for inclusion in the calculation and limited to that 100,000? Just want to confirm.
Yep, it is eligible. It would be limited to the 100,000 as long as it was done through the normal payroll.
Okay. Excellent. Question here from Nicole, FMLA, how will that work and factor into payroll?
I believe that's eligible in the calculation. Carrie, can you confirm?
It is eligible in the calculation, and the calculator that we do have out on our website and or to be provided from advisors does outline that as a line item, so there is further guidance on within that calculator.
Okay, thank you. Amy, your question was specifically about the disaster recovery application and the PPP. I believe Debbie just answered that. If you have further questions, you can submit a chat or a follow-up question, but I think we got that one. Just to clarify for Linda, do 1099 contractors have to file separately, or do we include them in our loan request along with employees?
Right, so they could be included along with the loan request. We just need that separate documentation to verify the amount that they were paid.
Thank you. Question from Derek. If our payroll essentially doubled as of January 1st due to business expansion, would that have any effect on this situation, or do we still use the 2019 payroll?
Right now, based on the recommendations that we're being given, we would still use the 2019 payroll.
Thank you. Question from Ronald. Are the loan proceeds received non-taxable?
So I know that, go ahead, Carrie.
So it is our understanding that if you're referring to the forgiveness portion is non-taxable.
Correct, thank you.
Let me just double checking to make sure we get, Ronald had a follow-up question too. Once I calculate my 2019 FTE total, do I need to meet or exceed that level during the 8-week period after the loan funds?
You would need to at least maintain that level during the 8-week period. To the extent that it's not maintained at that level, that would factor into the amount of forgiveness that you're eligible for.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Kara. If a business miscalculates and ends up a couple people short of their average staffing number, or the wages are short more than 25% for a couple people, would that take forgiveness down to 0, or is it prorated? Is it a prorated type of penalty?
It's a prorated type of penalty.
Thank you. Trying to make sure we've got the questions. Joe had a question about calculating payroll. Do we use our total payroll liabilities or the gross payroll?
I believe it's total, isn't it, Carrie? Carrie, are you there?
I apologize, Debbie. Yes, correct. It is total payroll.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did get a chat from Amy. She was wondering and wanted further clarification if the SBA would allow to cancel the disaster loan application if we find the PPP more beneficial.
I believe you can. Carrie, do you have any additional detail on that?
You can withdraw that application. You would need to reach out to the SBA directly.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Question from Brandy. If our business is an Alaris customer, do we need to provide articles showing that?
Only if we don't have them, if we don't already have them on file. If we have them on file, you do not need to resubmit.
Okay. All right. So perhaps double checking to make sure those are on file. Debbie, is that what you would recommend?
And so if you're an existing client and you feel that the information has already been provided, go ahead and submit your application and package without it. If we're missing something, we'll certainly follow up with you and let you know.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Heidi. If you have multiple businesses with different EINs, do you include them all in one application, or does that require separate applications?
I believe that would require separate applications, wouldn't it, Carrie?
That's absolutely correct. Each entity that has its own EIN number, provided that it doesn't coincide with the affiliation test, can apply for a loan independently.
Thank you. And Heidi actually had a second question. Is the emergency sick leave under the CARES Act count towards the loan forgiveness amount?
I believe to the extent that you're paying payroll as part of that sick leave benefit, it would be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Double checking, I've got some questions coming in from Chad and some are in the Q&A, so just want to ensure that we get everyone's questions answered. Julie had a question. Are union fringe benefits included in this program?
So I'm not sure. We haven't gotten that question. I haven't seen any specific guidance on that. Carrie, what are your thoughts?
We need further clarification from the SBA. There has been no guidance on union benefits at this point.
So we'll need to follow up on that.
Okay, thank you. David's question is, if someone owned 20% in 2019 but recently became a 19% owner, is their information still needed in order to apply?
So Debbie, I can take this question. The 20% is applicable based on the date of application.
Perfect, thank you. There are several more questions about the 1099s, but I think we've covered that and how to calculate that into the average monthly payroll amount. Debbie and Carrie, is there anything else you want to say to clarify that?
Nope. Just to the extent that you've got those independent contractors, we would need that form of documentation.
Okay, thank you. Deb did have a question here that she wanted to confirm. The FFCRA tax credit is not part of the calculation on what is needed for payroll costs. You can confirm that?
I'm sorry, Mary, can you repeat that?
Sure. The FFCRA tax credit is not part of the calculation on what is needed for the payroll costs?
I'm not aware, but we'd need to follow up on that unless, Carrie, you know.
I don't have any further guidance on that at this point.
Yeah, let us follow up on that one.
Okay, thank you. Tom had a question. A restaurant owner with multiple locations, so multiple LLCs, is that considered one application?
So a restaurant with multiple locations, because they do fall under that hospitality, can apply again per EIN number or per entity, and the 500 employees or less from a small business standpoint test differs for a restaurant with multiple locations. They would need to have less than 500 per location.
Thank you. Let's see. Susan had a follow-up question, I believe. Are guaranteed payments to partners included in payroll?
I don't believe they would be, no. Carrie, your thoughts?
And we did have this question earlier on in the session, and the guidance was that if it's any income that's running through a K-1 versus your normal salary would not be included.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie. Teresa's question, our corporation is owned by an ESOP. Which entity will be submitting for the loan, the ESOP or the corporation?
So that's actually go ahead, Debbie.
Go ahead, Carrie.
That's actually a great question. We are working with our internal ESOP group at this point for further guidance on that. However, the direction we are getting at this point is that it is the actual operating entity itself.
And that would have been my thought as well. It would be the operating entity.
Okay. Okay, a couple other questions here. Question from Rick. Currently, my employees are furloughed. When do I have to have them rehire to qualify for forgiveness? I know we've touched on this, but just to clarify one more time.
Yeah, so the eligibility for forgiveness would be based in that 8-week period. So to the extent that they're furloughed, you would want to get them back on the payroll to be eligible for forgiveness for, I would say, as much as possible in that 8-week period, because that will factor into the amount of forgiveness.
And this is a question, the way it's been asked, I don't know that we've covered this specifically, but just wanted to clarify for Susan, if a company has no regular payroll, but just all subcontractors, are they eligible for this loan?
To the extent that we are getting guidance, outside contractors are eligible. They would just need to support that eligibility through proper documentation. But at this point, the guidance is suggesting they are eligible.
Thank you. Steve had a question, he wanted to clarify. The bill language gives the employer the option of using 2019 or the first 2 months of 2020 as the baseline for FTE calculation for forgiveness. Has this changed with the guidance?
So Debbie, I can step in here. We have seen different guidance come out at different points throughout this period. The guidance that we are taking is direct from our SBA consultant, which we'll be using 2019.
Thank you, Carrie. A lot of information out there, so really appreciate you clarifying. Question from Kara. What period of time would they look at to make sure you are not reducing employee wages more than 25%?
And that would go to that 8-week period. And what they're going to do is take a look at the average payroll relative in that 8-week period relative to what your average payroll was in 2019.
Okay. Question here from Jessica. She was under the impression that only $10,000 could be forgiven, but it sounds like all payroll can be forgiven over an 8-week period after receiving the loan. Is there a cap on payroll forgiveness if no employees are let go?
There's not a cap that I'm aware of. So to the extent that you apply for a loan, you could potentially see 100% of that forgiven if it meets those eligibility requirements.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Chris. What does the statement on the application, current economic uncertainty makes this loan necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant? What does that mean? Does it require us to face a liquidity crisis, or is it acceptable as long as employees are retained?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it really speaks to the integrity of the program. Really what the government is trying to do is they are trying to assist companies that have really undergone some type of a hardship, either because their business has been shut or that they've seen a substantial reduction in sales. And so what that application is doing is it's asking you to certify that that really is applicable to your company. What we want to make sure isn't happening is that we have companies that even under the current situations are still healthy and viable and really taking advantage of the program. And so the program is intended for those that truly have suffered a hardship, and that's what that question is getting to.
Okay, thank you. Question from Eric. If our business entity started on January 1st of 2020 of this year, do we qualify for this loan?
You do, and Carrie, do you want to maybe share the details?
I would have to follow up on the exact details. You do qualify. We'll look at a period between January 1st and February 15th, I believe is how the guidance is put out. So we will look at that period to determine your average number of employees and as well as your payroll.
Yep.
Thank you. Tim had a question, and maybe you just spoke to this just a moment ago, Debbie, but just to clarify for Tim, who is eligible, or to what extent do you have to prove your business is negatively impacted by events?
Yeah, and that's really what we just spoke to with that question. And so really the only test is that you need to verify in that application that you have suffered a hardship, and that's that certification that the SBA is looking for. Now keep in mind, I mentioned earlier that these loans are non-recourse, so you're not required to provide a personal guarantee. But the government is expecting that the funds are being used appropriately and that there's no fraudulent component to it. And that's what they're asking, is they're asking you to verify that you truly have suffered a hardship.
Question from Jared, and he mentions that maybe this was already answered, but what if the employees are still getting 40 hours a week? Do they qualify at this time?
So even if you haven't laid off employees, to the extent your business has suffered a hardship, you are eligible to apply for the program. And then really what the proceeds of the loan would be to allow you, given the hardship that you're suffering in your business, to continue to pay those payroll expenses over the next several weeks. But yes, you would be eligible even if you haven't laid off employees at this point, as long as you've suffered that hardship.
Okay. Thank you. One question here from Eric. Are there any restrictions to apply for exempt business from the shutdown?
Not that I'm aware of, Carrie.
There are not that I'm aware of either.
Thank you. At this time, I just want to mention that I am filtering through the Q&A. We had a lot of questions come in, and I am seeing some repeat. So I'm going to ask anyone who's still on the call, if your question has not been answered, you can submit the question through the chat feature. I am working through the Q&A, but we had hundreds of questions submitted, which we love, and we appreciate your engagement here. It's very important. But if your specific question wasn't answered, as a lot are focused on the salary cap and the contractor question, feel free to go ahead and send that through the chat to me, and I will get that question prioritized and up to Carrie and Debbie immediately. Just a couple more here before I segue over to Missy, though, that I do see. One question from Steve came in. Debbie, can we include third-party payroll processing fees in payroll expenses?
So, Carrie, I think this came up yesterday. Do we have any follow-up or clarification on that?
We do not have further clarification at this point. I believe the guidance, the direction at this point is you cannot include those fees.
Okay, and that was my understanding as well, is at this point in time our understanding is no, those are not eligible.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I didn't see any additional questions come in from the chat. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to transition over to our Director of Communication, Missy Kenny. Missy, are you still able to, are you here and joining us and showing us on the website where folks can go to navigate to all these resources?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I am going to just show you where you can find all of these on our website. So if you just go to Alerus.com, and at the top of our homepage, we have an alert here for COVID-19. You can just click that to access all of the information that we have regarding the coronavirus. Down here in the bottom for resources for your business, there's a variety of different programs, as Debbie mentioned, that are available with the disaster loans as well as the Paycheck Protection Program. This page right here, this is where you can find all of the resources that we talked about. And so if you're not working already with an Alerus advisor, click this inquiry form, fill it out, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And then here are all of those resources. And so the checklist is really that checklist that you can use as a guide. It's a lot of the information that Debbie and Carrie covered today. The application form, this is a PDF application for the PPP, and you can fill that in electronically, and then also the loan calculator. And this is an Excel spreadsheet that you can utilize to help you determine that loan amount.
Fantastic. Thank you, Missy, for sharing that information. Debbie and Carrie, did you have any additional questions that, or any highlights that you wanted to just share with people as we begin to wrap up this webinar?
No, I really didn't. I think we've covered a lot of information. I hope people have found it useful and valuable in getting some of the questions answered. To the extent that we haven't been able to answer your question, we will make sure that we follow up on those things and try to get more information pushed out to our website to keep you informed. There is a lot of information coming out very quickly. Some of that information is evolving, and we'll just make sure we stay current on that and get that out to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, if you do have questions, you can certainly always reach out to your Alerus advisor as well.
Okay. And for maybe this is a follow-up question for you, Debbie, or potentially Missy. I did see a couple of people were asking if they're unsure as to who their advisor is. How can they find out? Who should they call?
And Debbie, I can actually follow up on that.
Sure, go ahead.
I would actually, my best recommendation, either the customer care line or submit an inquiry on our website. I am pairing and matching up those applicants that are existing clients with their advisor.
Great, thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. And I would like to mention that we had over 300 questions submitted through our Q&A, so I really appreciate everyone's patience as we were attempting to get to every question that we could. If you did not have your question answered, feel free to reach out to myself, mary.eisenberg@alerus.com, and I can filter that into the Q&A that Carrie and Debbie are going to be following up on those questions that weren't answered. So Debbie, Carrie, thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions that came in and for providing this information, and Missy, to you for showing us where on the website people can go to follow up. And again, thank you to everyone who was able to join today. New information is coming out, so please check back on our website as new updates become available. Thank you, everyone. Debbie, Carrie, anything else before we sign off?
No, I didn't have anything. Again, I hope it was beneficial, and we'll continue to get information out as we receive it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.